right, you can see the Chancellor, who has just dampened hopes of tax cuts in the upcoming autumn budget. But the question is, which of them is the real Conservative? And it's always good to round off with some positive news. While the cost of living crisis continues, a beam of light has shone through the dark, rainy clouds of Remainiac propaganda. Revised figures from the Office for National Statistics have shown the UK economy is 2% larger than initially thought, and that we outgrew the German economy over the past 4 years. All, as the BBC would say, in spite of Brexit. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a scintillating panel this evening. GB News' very own ray of sunshine, the historian Dr. David Starkey, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. As always, you know what I'm going to say. I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the news of the day with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Jacob. Good evening. Our top stories. The Education Secretary has confirmed that the list of schools affected by the concrete crisis will be published this week. It comes after Gillian Keegan was heard expressing her frustration at the situation in an unusually frank, expletive-ridden hot mic moment.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their ass and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
Well, Ms Keegan has since apologised for her use of language.
Well, it wasn't me talking about anyone in particular. It was an off-the-cuff remark after the news interview had finished, or apparently after it had finished. And I'd like to apologise for my choice language. That was unnecessary. But it was an off-the-cuff remark, basically, you know, based on the interview. The interview had been pressing me quite hard, you know, why I hadn't solved this issue, which had been going on since 1994.
Well, meanwhile, the Prime Minister has attempted to bat away accusations regarding his role in the crisis while he was Chancellor. Rishi Sunak says it's wrong to suggest that he is to blame for failing to fully fund a programme to rebuild England's schools.
Of course, I know the timing is frustrating, but I want to give people a sense of the scale of what we're grappling with here. There are around 22,000 schools in England, and the important thing to know is we expect that 95% of those schools won't be impacted by this. Around 50 schools have already been mitigated, another 100 are in the process of being so, and our expectation is in a matter of weeks, the bulk of the remaining schools that will have this issue will be identified as well.
In other news, Northern Ireland's Police Chief Simon Byrne has resigned. A recent court ruling deemed that Mr Byrne's disciplinary actions against 2 junior officers was unlawful. It follows a major data breach last month, which revealed the details of 10,000 PSNI staff. UK government sources have confirmed that the French police have stopped more than 15,000 migrants from reaching the UK in small boats so far this year. GB News can reveal tougher French policing around some key migrant launch points has significantly disrupted people smuggling activities. The overall number of Channel migrants is more than 20% down on the same period last year. Angela Rayner is the new Shadow Deputy Prime Minister and Levelling Up Secretary as Sir Keir Starmer reshuffles his top team. She replaces Lisa Nandy, who becomes Shadow Cabinet Minister for International Development. Among the other changes, Pat McFadden takes on the influential role of National Campaign Coordinator, as well as Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get straight back to Jacob.
The government's energy bill is set for its third and final reading tomorrow, before the chance of ping-pong with the Lords and the Commons. The bill proposes a number of things. It will enable £20 billion of your money to be spent on carbon capture technology that stores carbon dioxide emissions in exhausted gas wells. But £20 billion is a lot of your money to be spent on a speculative technology. A recent study showed that when carbon capture is used for a given industrial plant, when taking into account the CO2 emissions produced via the process itself, emissions would only be reduced by about 10%. The bill also focuses on home insulation, which is a good thing within itself, but has some extreme measures. It gives the power to the government to criminalise people in future for not following regulations with minimal parliamentary oversight. What do I mean by this? Well, when New Labour was at its height, it was creating new criminal offences day after day. And the Conservatives at that point and the House of Lords argued that it was wrong to create criminal offences without a full parliamentary process. Now the energy bill is going to make it possible to create criminal offences by a quick route. This is constitutionally wrong. It may also make it more difficult for people to sell homes or rent properties which aren't at a high enough insulation standard. We have a very old housing stock in this country, lots of listed buildings, buildings in conservation areas, where one side of the government won't give you permission to make them more environmentally friendly, to insulate them more, and the other's saying, well, you may not be able to sell them if you haven't insulated them. So you'll have knock-on effects on the housing market and you'll take away people's major asset. Your major asset could be at threat. The bill allows the government to regulate electrical appliances in the way the European Union does. You remember all these stories about how powerful a kettle could be, or a Hoover, a vacuum cleaner. This bill will allow us to do the same. But this is outgreening the Greens. And for a Conservative government to ignore the market is surely a mistake, because sensible consumers, and I assume consumers are sensible, will always choose more energy-efficient appliances because in the long run it will save them money, but they will judge for themselves the efficiency of the product against its energy use, rather than it being laid down by bureaucrats who think they know best. The market should be left to do its work. But the overarching intention is clear. It prioritises net zero at a timetable that was set randomly without being properly thought through, rather than reducing the cost of energy. That's why Craig McKinley and I tabled an amendment that would prioritise the lower cost. It says in its glorious parliamentary language that the Secretary of State will have a duty to ensure the lowest possible cost of energy to businesses and households in exercising any function under or in connection with this Act. It is the duty of the Secretary of State to ensure the lowest possible cost of energy to businesses and households. Now, if the government accepted our amendment tomorrow, it would at least ameliorate some of the worst elements of the bill. At a time of a cost of living crisis, it is the government's role to make life easier for people, to lift burdens off their shoulders. The bill should be reversing the ban on oil boilers set to affect 1.7 million homes across the country. It should be reversing the boiler ban on all new builds in 2025, taking away one of the lowest costs of heating. It should be reversing the 2030 ban on new petrol and diesel cars. It should be making it easier to rent or sell homes to ease the housing crisis, not harder. The bill does the opposite. And for that reason, it ought to be scrapped, or at least entirely defanged, which is what I was trying to do in my brief period as Energy Secretary. I obviously won't be supporting this bill tomorrow. But of course, Vox Populi Vox Dei, the voice of the people, is the voice of God. Today we ask the people of Hull, reducing energy bills or net zero should be the priority. And the people...
Definitely putting it down to make it affordable for people to have their heating on.
Well, it's the whole thing or whatever, carbon impacts something or other, but it's the energy prices and the price it takes to make electric cars and for it to benefit everything costs more than it does to actually just use gas.
Yeah, obviously everyone wants less bills in the short term, but I'm somebody who likes to think that the government's looking more in the future. It'd be more beneficial over time to become a country that's proud to be net zero, you know.
Well, I think they should do more to bring the energy prices down. I don't think they seem to be trying very hard to bring about net zero. Yeah.
I think they need to put down the price, the electricity, the gas, because now it's very difficult life for the population. I tell the government, please, just to work very hard and put the energy down.
I'm joined now by Ali Warrington, Campaign Director for We Are Possible, the climate action group. Ali, thank you so much for joining me. In a cost of living crisis, shouldn't the government be ensuring that people have access to low-cost energy as the priority?
Absolutely. The government should be doing that. And the cost of living crisis and the energy cost crisis have been driven by the cost of gas power, which has been soaring over the past 18 months. We all want lower energy bills for people across the UK, and the only way to achieve that is to end the use of gas power and the high cost associated with that, and start getting on with the job of delivering clean, cheap energy like onshore wind and solar power, because that is what will cut costs for ordinary people.
And technology has helped bring down the price of solar panels very considerably, but you still need gas power for when the sun doesn't shine and when the wind doesn't blow. So we're still going to need access to considerable quantities of gas.
So I actually don't think that's the case. You know, there's research that's been done on a 100% renewables electricity grid. If you have enough renewables capacity and you have storage and you have interconnectors, then it is not only possible to have that very, very low carbon grid, but it actually saves billions for consumers as well, because it is much cheaper to use our own domestic renewable energy resources than to keep relying on expensive volatile imported gas.
But actually, we've got our own domestic sources of gas, and we could get more if we were to invest in fracking, which would provide us with a cheap and secure supply of gas.
So any gas that the UK extracts domestically, not only will it contribute to emissions that are pushing up dangerous climate extremes, it will be sold on international markets. It will be sold at the going rate. It will not cut domestic energy bills by 1 penny.
But if you have more supply in the global market, that reduces prices. The reason the price went up is the Russian supply was taken out of the market. Supply and demand functions in that way. So any extra supply reduces global prices.
But not necessarily, because it's a very volatile market. And as we saw during the past 18 months, the oil and gas companies, the BPs and the Shells, they've been cashing in. They've been raking in billions in excess profits.
Well, they have, but bear in mind in 2020, during the pandemic, the price of crude oil was below zero. So actually you had to pay people to take your oil because there wasn't sufficient storage when demand collapsed. So oil companies, yes, they're affected by the cycle, and sometimes they make profits, sometimes they make losses. That's how an economy works.
But that volatility in oil prices and energy prices is not doing anybody any good. You don't get that volatility with onshore wind and solar. You get cheap, reliable, secure energy that is not contributing to climate change.
You get a different form of volatility because you can't be sure the wind will blow or the sun will shine. And if you're going to have battery storage, that's very inefficient and also uses a lot of rare earth metals and so on that are themselves quite dirty.
Sure. So, you know, these renewable energy sources are variable, but that is something that is able to be addressed by things like energy efficiency measures, by storage. You know, this is something that the National Grid has been looking at for a long time, and the government should be getting on with delivering this.
But smart meters, which is part of the bill, is not an energy efficiency measure, is it? It's about trying to price people into using energy when it's available. Whereas with gas, you have a secure supply of energy. You can have it day in, day out. You can meet peaks and troughs, which you can't do with the inflexibility of renewables.
But that's just not the case. If you have enough different types of renewable energy, so not just solar, but also onshore wind, offshore wind, storage, then you actually are able to...
The storage, you're talking about battery storage.
And there are other types of storage.
What other storage are you thinking about? Pumped hydro? I mean, there's a limited amount of that, but that's not very significant.
There are limits as well, but if you have enough different types of capacity and if you have interconnectors, so it's not just that the UK has to supply all its own energy, it can balance with countries in Europe as well.
So if this is so economic and so low cost, why isn't the market doing this?
Well, you know, one problem is the regulations that are set by central government, things like the ban on onshore wind, which they are refusing to lift. And it's very difficult for the market to get on with delivering the clean energy supply that we need when we have these ridiculous planning blocks in place, which are preventing communities in England that want new onshore wind to get it.
But offshore wind has grown enormously and solar has grown enormously. The rules may be changed in onshore wind, but the market hasn't been racing to do this because there are still the gaps. And actually, we're going to be using fossil fuels for years to come, and we need cheap and affordable energy. We've only got the renewables we've got is because of the high charges that are put on industry and households in the electricity supplement that people pay.
But that's just not true. I mean, the amount of a typical energy bill which comes from green levies is absolutely tiny. It is much, much smaller than the amount that people have been paying in excess costs over the past 18 months because of soaring fossil fuel prices.
Well, people are paying over £100 a year on the electricity green charges. That's a lot for people to pay.
Absolutely, but it's much, much smaller amount than the excess that people have been paying over the past year because of oil and gas profits going up. That's, that's something like a doubling of energy bills.
Yes, energy bills went up because of the war in Ukraine. But actually, if we were using our resources to the maximum and were extracting the gas that we need and had not run off with this other scheme, we'd have had cheaper
we wouldn't have
gas.
had cheaper energy. That gas would still have been sold on international markets. It would not have cut energy bills at all for people in the UK, and it would have been a complete dereliction of the UK's climate commitments.
But nobody else is doing this. China has produced, in the last 10 years, more than we have since the Industrial Revolution, or perhaps 15 years.
We're here to talk about the UK government's policy. The UK cannot be an effective global voice for action on the climate crisis if they're being hypocritical at home.
We're not an effective global voice because nobody's taking any notice of us.
Well,
we're making ourselves poorer. And I don't want my constituents to be poorer. I want them to be more prosperous.
The thing that is making your constituents poorer is reliance on the dirty, expensive technologies of the past, like oil and gas. If your constituents had clean energy, that would also be cheaper energy. And the UK could also seize the economic opportunities presented by the clean transition.
If it were so cheap, the market would provide it. The market hasn't provided. It's done on subsidies. Why they want another £20 billion of subsidy for the carbon capture and storage.
So on carbon capture and storage, I would agree that putting that on oil and gas on gas power plants is a complete waste of money, because all that is doing is putting even more charges on a technology that is already too expensive. That's not the answer.
I've given you the last word. Thank you very much for joining me, Ali. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, our local Ponzi scheme that would put Bernie Madoff to shame. Plus, has Brexit been vindicated? You know the answer to that.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country, with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Michael says, if you think your friends in the Department of Energy are on the wrong track, just wait till Ed Miliband is in charge. That is a very good point. And Helena says, Mother Nature has the answer, plant more trees. Well, I'm quite proud of the fact that last year I planted an acorn, and I now have a little oak tree that is growing. I did it with young Alfred, who you may remember read the Mail Mogs a week or two ago. Going after the shirkers from home has become almost as popular over the summer as the Ashes. But it seems the shirkers will always find new ways of avoiding work, especially in the public sector. The Daily Mail front page today revealed that nearly 1,500 council employees working not from home, but possibly from the beach. It's the latest development of the working from home saga, but this time, town hall flunkies, over a period of roughly 3 years, have been piling in their requests to work from overseas. But this is really just a footnote in the much broader problem of local government inefficiency. So in a State of Nation first, this is the competition for the incompetent council across the United Kingdom. So thank you for your nominations. We've considered them carefully, and with other thoughts, we have whittled it down to the final three. In third place is Haringey Council, proportionally the most complained about council in the country. The regulator of social housing found the council had failed to complete 4,000 high-risk fire safety works, more than 100 properties had serious hazards, and nearly 5,000 did not meet minimum social housing standards. The Ombudsman found the council displayed, quote, no evidence of learning to prevent failings re-occurring. Coming in at second place is South Cambridge District Council, the council that felt it appropriate to move to a 4-day working, well, you hope at least they spent 4 days working, week. The decision was mired in controversy, but it was even reported over the weekend that the council amended supporting research that was meant to be completely independent. And for the winner, it could be no one else but the Woking councillors who put the woe in Woking. Woking is a small town south of London of about 100,000 people. Its annual budget runs at a modest £24 million. Now, remember this figure, £24 million. It then found itself with a debt of £2 billion. It was essentially a Ponzi scheme that would put Bernie Madoff to shame. In 2011, the council began borrowing funds to invest in commercial property schemes, despite not having any staff with relevant expertise. And it planned to take out even more loans in future. But when the pandemic hit, commercial property plummeted. Rents went down, occupancy went down too. So now, as for other councils such as Croydon, the government is expected to grant the council the power to increase the council tax to cover the losses. In other words, more cost for you. I'm joined now by my panel, GB News' ray of sunshine, Dr. David Starkey, and GB News' very own senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, you're in favour of council officials being on the beach?
Not necessarily on the beach, but I don't see any problem at all if all your work is online. It doesn't matter where you do it from. Now, obviously, there are certain jobs where you have to be in the office. An MP can't work from home, nor can a TV presenter, and you being both, you can't work from home at all. But if you're doing something like processing, I don't know, council tax bills or whatever, and your entire job is online, doesn't matter whether you do that from Australia or Croydon or London or wherever.
But it does if people aren't getting the service that they expect.
Well, are there been complaints about it?
Lots, yes, that people aren't getting routine public services delivered. They can't get through on telephone lines. HMRC, national rather than local government, nobody can get through to at the moment. And they are working from home.
Are we blaming that on
working, at least in part,
Can we,
yes.
Jacob, can we just actually begin with fundamentals? Local, place.
the specificity of place. One of the great problems about our local government is that it's not. That's to say that on the whole, the administrators do not live in the places that they administer. It's not simply that they're on the beach, they're usually in the suburbs. And this is one of the, or in the countryside. This is one of the profound problems, particularly of the worst administered places in the country, which are not actually on your list. They're broadly the old, decaying, smaller industrial towns of the north. And it is the catastrophe that the administrators do not experience what they administer. And this seems to me, in other words, there are very special considerations here. And I think that we should be paying attention to those. I think we should also just consider the sheer sense of outrage that you are paying a tax to enable somebody to sun themselves in the Caribbean whilst they're pretending to administer a charge which you will be deeply resentful of anyway. It is this utter complacency, I'm afraid, of Nigel, along with most other of the hangers-on of our governing class.
This is a very good point, that if you're ringing up the council to say the bins haven't been collected from 27 Acacia Avenue and the person is in the Caribbean, they're not thinking about Acacia Avenue at all.
In the event you've got somebody working in customer services doing that very job, they should be in the office dealing with it, because they may have to deal with people face to face.
OK, so who are you going to have in the Caribbean? What roles do you
that's
think?
what I mean. No, I mean, I think that, well, if your job is solely
Nigel,
online...
isn't the worst thing likely to be that it'll be a very senior person in the Caribbean?
I mean,
in other words, somebody who should be on the job, observing other people, involved in the community.
Well, if they're doing those things, of course they shouldn't be in the Caribbean or anywhere else apart from in their own office. But what I'm talking about is if it's a job which relies totally online.
I think you're
totally online, then you can do it from absolutely anywhere in the world.
Well, you can for certain types of job, but if we actually take the
online jobs, I'm talking.
You can be a computer programmer and work wherever you like. But there aren't many of those in local government.
But I mean, the IT department, for instance, in local government could be based anywhere, for instance.
Nigel, can we just actually take this point specifically of a routine job, which is what you were talking about? In general, routine jobs need discipline. Routine jobs need routines enforcing upon them. The last thing that you want with a routine job is to have somebody able to knock off when they want, able to go for a walk in the garden when they want.
This is a very old-fashioned view of the world.
I'm sorry, it's so old-fashioned, isn't it, that the leading city companies are all starting to enforce this on their employees. Terribly old-fashioned people like BlackRock, Nigel. Maybe you haven't heard of it.
But if you're in a call centre and you're answering the telephone, you can't be disturbed by delivery coming to your front door, which you are if you're working from home, or a dog or a child. You just can't. That's your job.
Well, but this is the point I'm making.
But people ringing the passport office found that it was being answered remotely and there was a dog in the background.
Again, look at the Inland Revenue. I mean, let's just shift to the Inland Revenue before COVID was a government department on the whole was outstandingly efficient. Its efficiency has collapsed exactly in line with home working, and there is nothing surprising about this at all.
Well, the last point here, I just want to take up David's point. The government have been trying to get civil servants out of London. What better way to do it than have them working remotely all over the country?
I would say that HMRC has provided me with the best answers of any government department for my constituents as long as I've been an MP, but they now can't get through to them on the telephone. So if you come to an MP, you will still get a first-class service and really intelligent letters sent back to my constituents. But you can't ring them up to solve your problem for yourself, which is deeply inefficient.
And you're blaming that on people
working from home. Yeah. It's what's changed.
Nothing else has changed. Sorry, again, we need to look at evidence. Nothing else has changed.
OK. Nothing else has changed. Thanks to my panel. Coming up, we'll be playing a game of Spot the Conservative. Plus, a beam of sunshine pierces through the grey clouds of Remainer propaganda.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. As we head into Tuesday, there will be a little bit of fog around tonight. Whilst in the southwest, we can expect some strong blustery winds, but the hot and sunny weather returns as we go through tomorrow because of this air of high pressure dominating the picture across the UK, leading to largely settled weather and dragging hot air in from the south. Meanwhile, looking at the details through Monday night, there is a front across the far north of Scotland, bringing some cloud and rain to Shetland. Elsewhere, a largely dry picture, clear skies, but some mist and fog patches developing, particularly towards the north and the east. Windier in the southwest, but many places seeing temperatures not dropping a huge amount, generally staying the mid to high teens Celsius, so quite a warm night to come. Bright start on Tuesday morning. Any mist and fog should quickly clear away. And then we do have that front I mentioned earlier gradually pushing its way further southwards, so turning a bit cloudy, a bit damp perhaps for Orkney in the far north of mainland Scotland. Elsewhere across the UK, lots of fine sunny weather, plenty of blue skies, and temperatures could be a touch higher than today for some, so highs around 31 Celsius, staying quite windy towards the southwest though. Wednesday's going to get off to a bit of a murky start for some eastern northeastern parts with some har and sea fret around. Most of that will burn back towards the coast, though the cloud could linger across the far east of Scotland. Otherwise, though, yes, it'll be a touch cloudier than recent days, but plenty of sunshine to be had. And with that, temperatures rising, likely to peak around Wednesday or Thursday, though the risk of some showers.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. John, Thank you for introducing David Starkey in a decent manner today, Jacob. About time. Well, he's been a hero today. He's had very difficult traffic problems getting here, but like whoever it is, the Wells Fargo, he always gets through. And Patty says, people in our councils should suffer the pain that locals have to suffer owing to their incompetence. Well, I agree with you, Patty. Thank you for that. Historically, a Labour leader of the opposition would squirm and whine when a Conservative Chancellor promised to lower tax. Now, the age-old dynamic seems to have turned on its head. Sir Keir Starmer, demonstrating uncharacteristic prudence, has pledged not to raise income tax if he wins the next election. This also follows his recent promise not to introduce a wealth tax. Those comments have drawn the ire of the socialist wings of the Labour Party, but in a similar move, Jeremy Hunt has also confounded his party's traditional stance by downplaying the chances of tax cuts before the next election. Tory MPs collectively groaned on Sunday morning when the Chancellor appeared to rule out tax cuts in the autumn budget. The failure to reduce the tax pain for working people may jeopardise the Conservatives' election prospects. Most bewilderingly of all is that the Labour leader of the opposition seems to wish to mitigate the tax burden more than the Tory Chancellor. It's becoming difficult to spot the difference between Jeremy Hunt and Sir Keir, or Sir Jeremy and Keir, who knows? So little difference that they almost appear to be the same. In fact, we thought we'd ask the good old artificial intelligence what would happen if their faces merged together. If you take a look, the result is remarkably uncanny. Still with me is my panel, our little ray of sunshine, David Starkey, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. So, have the Tories found the Whigs bathing and stolen their clothes, or vice versa?
The point you made, and indeed the image made so clearly, about the two parties essentially having merged is correct. But equally, I think you need to look at some of the more serious points, particularly from Hunt's point of view. Latest opinion polls show quite clearly that the public on the whole is not interested in tax cuts if it thinks they will mean reduced public services. This, and again, we should be asking why that is the case. Can we look at fundamentals? Only 60%, less than 60% of the working population actually pay income tax. 42% of adults do not pay income tax. If we actually look at the distribution of the tax burden, 1% of the working population pays 1/3 of tax. 10% of the working population pays 60%. What we've done, we've removed a vast part of the population from the burden of direct taxation. Is it any wonder the magic doesn't work as it used to? And of course, it's even more extreme in local government, which we were talking about just now. You know, local government actually raises only half of what it spends. So all the tests which should apply in democratic government, that there is a relationship between what you get and what you pay in taxation, these have all been broken, which means you can have all these myths about, you know, there are mysterious pots.
But Nigel, if David's right, then Sir Keir, of course he would say that, wouldn't he? But then Sir Keir could go ahead and raise taxes and all his Labour friends would vote for him anyway, because it all falls on other people. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree.
He's trying to get the middle class.
I think that what we've got here with both Jeremy Hunt and Keir Starmer is at last we have the end of kind of recklessness in government. We've had a few years of it with Boris Johnson, a brief period of it with Liz Truss, and now the grown-ups are back. And I think that what Keir Starmer is saying at the moment is, look, I'm not going to raise your income tax, but what I am going to have to do is take on Tory spending and tax plans for the first 2 years of a Labour administration. Exactly what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did back in '97. That, to me, makes sense.
But that was with a crucial difference, because Gordon Brown and Tony Blair took on a strongly growing economy. We have no growth in this economy, and we have absolutely a tax base that's the highest for 70 years.
Yeah.
That we're not getting any growth in this economy.
These are not grown
and we're
up.
spending
it's
too much money.
stasis.
No,
Really, Nigel, this reference to grown-ups means people actually frozen in the headlight. Again, we need to look at where the responsibility for this lies. I think it lies partly in Gordon Brown for the grotesque inflation of government expenditure in the latter period of the new Labour government. And much more importantly, it lies with George Osborne and the way in which austerity was enforced. Remember, he did the worst possible thing you can do. He ring-fenced the NHS and was at education, and then everything else was arbitrarily cut. So what you've done, we've got these vast distortions in public expenditure. We've got enormous backlogs. We've got everything that we've been hearing about with aero, concrete and whatever. We've got a gross maladministration of both our taxation and expenditure.
That's my worry. My constituents write to me week in, week out saying we're not getting the public sector services we deserve and we expect and that we're paying for, and we're paying this high amount of tax. So at the moment, it seems to be the worst of all worlds.
Yes, I think it probably is. And so, I mean, the issue is going to be economic growth. This is something both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer
Shouldn't we be starting? Look, if we'd been rational at the time of austerity, because austerity was necessary. Just one second. Just quickly.
He's an historian.
What we should have done was exactly what Canada did and in Sweden did in similar circumstances in the 1990s. You have a serious inquiry into what the state should do. At the moment, the state is trying to do everything and predictably doing it badly.
And that COVID made the state think that it should do even more.
Yes, that's right, yes. I mean, I think austerity was a mistake, by the way, or at least the way it was actually imposed.
The way it was done.
And equally, yes, we suffer the results of COVID. I mean, what in fact Rishi Sunak proved as Chancellor was he adopted John McDonnell's budget. I mean, and spent that kind of money, which proved it could be spent. But any incoming government...
And we got the inflation that would have resulted.
It is sensible, unless the economy really is strong, to keep the spending and tax plans of the existing government and start going for growth. I mean, the whole thing is predicated.
But isn't this Liz Truss? I'm sorry, isn't this Liz Truss? Forgive me. This notion. Oh, but this notion.
That was not the way to do it.
But
not in the middle of inflation.
Nigel, how do you provoke growth with our current levels of taxation? I mean, can you tell me? You
take taxation out of it for a start.
No.
If Labour's idea works, and we don't know
the first time,
which is the £28 billion that they would spend.
Oh, that's magic money.
That is on a green.
I'm sorry, you might as well be advocating a magic carpet.
If you can grow the economy and jobs through
magic,
they're all ifs. We don't.
No, they're not.
We didn't know that COVID was going to happen. We didn't know the war in Ukraine was going to happen.
No.
We didn't know we'd be in this situation until we got here.
True, but instead what we're doing is we're going to make it even worse. We're proposing to spend yet more money, 28 billion, on top of the money that we don't have, that we're borrowing, and we know it'll be spent.
We're going to have doors to a close,
2 years.
Thank you to my panel, as feisty as always, and we'll see them, I hope, next week. Coming up, it's good news for the British economy, but does it help the cost of living crisis?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail, Moggs, and Tim has a very splendid, if complicated idea. Has it not occurred to HMRC that people working from home, or indeed the beach, are not paying the costs normally associated with travelling to work out of income that's already been taxed? So beach and home workers should be taxed as a benefit in kind of the cost of not commuting. I imagine the tax bill on the notional cost of daily return flights from the Costa del Skive to the place of work might just persuade skivers to get back to work. Well, that's certainly an ingenious idea, so thank you, Tim. Despite all the melancholic hubbub emanating from Westminster since 2016, recent figures have shown how the supposed Brexit-induced doom and gloom may merely be a phantom. The Office for National Statistics has revised former estimates showing that the UK has actually been in the middle of the pack of major Western economies since 2019, with more growth than Germany. The economy is 2% larger than previously thought, a significant expansion, and in contrast to the former view that we had been the slowest growing economy in the G7. The ONS is known to be more reliable than the ABR, and the revisions, coupled with fast-falling inflation, indicate that the UK is on the path to post-Brexit prosperity. The news will be a shock. They'll be bringing out the smelling salts to pessimists who regularly suggest that Britain is heading for economic ostracisation and how the only possible solution to our own failure is to rejoin the EU at once. Within the last few weeks, articles have cheered away with smugly enlightened glee as they describe Britain as the basket case of Europe. Some basket, some case. Yet, he who laughs last laughs longest. Already we're beginning to see the vindication of the Brexiteer stance, and all those people who have been saying we're the last country not to have reached the pre-COVID economic level, they're wrong. Anyway, I'm delighted to be joined now by Matthew Sinclair, former economic advisor to Liz Truss. What practical difference does a 2% increase in the estimate of GDP make to people's daily lives?
Well, so this isn't going to change people's lives, because what's happened here is that now the statistical authorities, and hopefully over time the headlines and everything else that comes off of those statistical numbers, are going to reflect the reality. And that reality is that Britain, although it is by no means matching the performance of the United States, of Eastern European or East Asian success stories, is doing about as well as our Western European peers and better than some. And I think that acknowledging that reality is really important to getting policy right going forward. But this is the statistics catching up with the reality. It's not changing the reality.
So people sitting at home won't now feel that they're any better off, and if they're being squeezed by rising prices, they are still squeezed by rising prices.
I'm afraid there's no money in this statistical release for them yet.
But does it have consequences for government policy? Because one of Rishi Sunak's pledges is to reduce the debt as a percentage of GDP. Well, if GDP's gone up by 2% and your debt remains level, you've reduced it, haven't you, just automatically? So it's good news for him in a way.
Stronger growth, you need quite a modest increase in growth to make the fiscal situation a fair bit easier. Of course, again, this growth, because it did exist in reality, will have been feeding through into tax receipts and will have been feeding through into sorts of benefit claims and everything like that drives public debts. But absolutely. And I think crucially also, it's just a really good challenge to this view that either Britain is hopelessly doomed to decline or it's hopelessly doomed to decline unless someone's pet cause, often Brexit, is changed. I think it's a challenge to actually get this stuff right.
OK, but from your point of view and my point of view, we wanted Brexit to unleash the country's animal instincts. If we're going a little bit faster than Germany, that hasn't yet happened, has it? It's better than somebody who's doing pretty poorly. How do we get to do as well as the United States and some of the Eastern European economies you mentioned?
Well, I think that firstly we need to ask whether we want to still be in this slow growth club, which is high spending, high taxing, and has these kind of bloated welfare states which have existed now for a very long time. So there's some fundamentals that we'll need to address. But it's also we've just made Britain a very hard place to build things, a very hard place to do business. This is an extremely expensive place to get a grid connection for your new industrial facility, to install broadband, so businesses have better internet connections. We've made this a hard place to do business. And if we can deal with some of those obstacles to business in Britain, then some of our natural strengths, Britain's enormous strength in the sectors which are growing fastest all around the world, can start to tell, whereas at the moment we hold them back.
OK, so many people would like to see the welfare state cost less by getting more people into work and so on and so forth. But how do you do that and keep voters on your side?
So I don't think voters are normally actually the challenge in terms of welfare reform. Most voters, I think historically this has been the case, have backed a safety net that's there for those who really need it, and which helps get back into work. But they generally tend to be pretty supportive of measures that will get you to that state rather than ensuring that welfare becomes this trap for people. I think the challenge really is trying to navigate through a system that's become incredibly complex, where a huge number of people have been allowed to drop out through the COVID crisis, and tackling that. And I think the danger is too often people are kind of just taking for granted these problems are there and assuming they're going to last whatever happens.
And the supply-side reforms that you mentioned to make doing business easier, every time a supply-side reform is mentioned, there are 100 Conservative MPs who are desperate to stop it, at least. So planning reform hasn't happened. Fracking, which would have been a huge boost to the economy, was stopped. Again, the politics of this, it may be easy to understand the economics, but how do you turn that into practical politics?
I think people need to ask whether they are sort of missing the wood for the trees here. If the economy continues to struggle the same way those other Western European economies are struggling, and if the only way we get growth is by juicing it with easy money, then you're going to undermine faith in capitalism. You're going to undermine people's belief that we're providing a positive way forward. And all of the kind of positive noises you might have got from opposing a new grid connection or stopping a broadband expansion are really not going to save you.
And would we have done even better? Would we have done as well as the United States if it hadn't been for Brexit?
I think that looking at the numbers we can see, we can't know the Brexit counterfactual, but looking at numbers we see here, it's really hard to see that if these countries which are still in the EU are struggling so much, that Brexit is what's driving this. I think what's driving this is the end of a long period of cheap money, and having made this a hard place to do business, and unfortunately, too many of the freedoms that Britain got back with Brexit are now being handed off to an administrative state rather than really sort of seizing that flexibility.
And some of the administrative states less accountable than it was within the European Union. Anyway, thank you very much, Matthew. That's all from me. Up next, it's the great Professor Daniel Wooten. Dan, what's coming up on your programme?
Jacob, hope you had a great weekend. It is nearly 1 year since Boris Johnson was deposed as Prime Minister. We're asking tonight, was that the biggest act of self-harm in modern British political history? Margaret Thatcher's former aide Niall Gardner will be here, but what do you reckon, Jacob?
Oh, I was very strongly opposed to it. Boris Johnson had won a majority of 80, is the most charismatic figure in the Conservative Party. He was a good Prime Minister. I backed him all the way, and I thought it was an act of harikiri on the part of the Conservative Party to get rid of him. But I'm now told I've got to finish, so I talked too long. That's coming up after the weather. It'll be very exciting. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and it's definitely sunny in Somerset tomorrow. Guaranteed.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. As we head into Tuesday, there will be a little bit of fog around tonight. Whilst in the southwest, we can expect some strong blustery winds, but the hot and sunny weather returns as we go through tomorrow because of this air of high pressure dominating the picture across the UK, leading to largely settled weather and dragging hot air in from the south. Meanwhile, looking at the details through Monday night, there is a front across the far north of Scotland, bringing some cloud and rain to Shetland. Elsewhere, a largely dry picture, clear skies, but some mist and fog patches developing, particularly towards the north and the east. Windier in the southwest, but many places seeing temperatures not dropping a huge amount, generally staying the mid to high teens Celsius, so quite a warm night to come. Bright start on Tuesday morning. Any mist and fog should quickly clear away. And then we do have that front I mentioned earlier gradually pushing its way further southwards, so turning a bit cloudy, a bit damp perhaps for Orkney in the far north of mainland Scotland. Elsewhere across the UK, lots of fine sunny weather, plenty of blue skies, and temperatures could be a touch higher than today for some, so highs around 31 Celsius, staying quite windy towards the southwest though. Wednesday's going to get off to a bit of a murky start for some eastern northeastern parts with some har and sea fret around. Most of that will burn back towards the coast, though the cloud could linger across the far east of Scotland. Otherwise, though, yes, it'll be a touch cloudier than recent days, but plenty of sunshine to be had. And with that, temperatures rising, likely to peak around Wednesday or Thursday, though the risk of some showers.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and